They built their dream home on land I owned while I was overseas, assuming I'd never catch wind of it. But when the HOA refused to tear it down, I realized I still held the key to something they couldn't do without: access to their electricity. What would you do if you could plunge your enemies into darkness with one decision? The letter arrived on a stormy Tuesday, stamped with my grandfather's lawyer's return address. I sliced it open at the kitchen counter of my cramped apartment, coffee pooling beneath the filter. Inside was a deed for 10 acres of woodland I hadn't laid eyes on since I was a kid. "Holy crap," I whispered, tracing the embossed seal. "I actually own land." My boss didn't take it well when I asked for time off, especially after signing on for a 3-year assignment with our company's Japanese branch. But I couldn't leave without laying eyes on my inheritance. It took 5 hours to drive to Pine Valley. The GPS led me along twisting back roads until I reached a gravel path that vanished into dense forest. A fading private property sign hung crooked on a tree, written in my grandfather's unmistakable script. Beyond it lay a stretch of untouched woods, and bordering one side, a polished neighborhood called Maple Ridge Heights. As I walked through the forest, childhood memories came flooding back, building tree forts, chasing frogs. At the edge of the forest, where the upscale homes loomed, I spotted the old survey markers, metal stakes with bright orange caps. An older man was trimming hedges in one of the backyards. He waved as I approached. "Hey there," I said. "Just inherited this place from my grandfather." He smiled and offered his hand. "You must be James Miller's grandson. I'm Doug Williams. Your granddad was a solid man. Turned down 100 offers to sell this land. Who tried to buy it?" Doug nodded toward the row of luxury homes. "Maple Ridge HOAs. Been itching to expand. Big plans for more mansions and a golf course." I frowned. "Well, I've got no intention of selling." Doug looked relieved. "Glad to hear it. Just be careful. That HOA board doesn't take rejection lightly, especially Karen Thompson. She's been eyeballing the land behind her place for years. Which one's hers?" Doug pointed to a pristine white house with columns and a trio of fancy cars in the driveway. "She's the HOA's VP. Acts like she owns half the town." 2 days later, I flew out to Japan, handing property oversight to a local company that promised quarterly checks. Between the workload and the time zone, months slipped by without much contact. Then, 3 years were gone. When I finally returned, exhausted but eager to reconnect with my land, I found the entrance blocked by a chain and a glaring construction zone, keep out sign. Baffled, I parked and made my way in through the trees, drawn by the sound of heavy equipment. What I saw made my stomach drop. A massive house was halfway built in a freshly cleared patch of woods on what I was certain was my land. Crews were installing windows, landscapers were shaping the dirt into a polished yard. A blonde woman in designer shades directed a gravel truck. She looked familiar, though we'd never met. "Excuse me," I called out. "What's going on here?" She turned, clearly irritated. "This is a private construction zone on private land." "That's right," I said. "My land." Her brows rose above her sunglasses. "And who exactly are you?" I offered my hand. "I'm the property owner. And you must be Karen Thompson." Her smile vanished. "How do you know my name?" "Doug Williams told me years back. Said you were very interested in expanding." She pulled off her glasses, icy blue eyes narrowing. "This lot was legally purchased from Maple Ridge HOA 6 months ago. I have the paperwork to prove it." "That's not possible. I never sold it." Her laugh was thin and sharp. "The boundary lines were reevaluated while you were overseas. This section was reclassified as part of the HOA's common area and sold to me." She motioned to the half-finished mansion. "As you can see, construction's well underway." My stomach turned. These woods belonged to my grandfather. Not anymore. She turned to leave, then glanced back. If you've got concerns, speak to our HOA president, Richard Hammond. But don't bother. Our legal team's top-notch. I watched her stride off, phone in hand. Minutes later, a black SUV arrived and a man in a tailored suit stepped out. She gestured toward me while speaking rapidly. I backed into the trees, heart pounding. Something shady had gone down while I was gone, and I needed answers. That night, sleep eluded me. I tore through storage boxes until I found my grandfather's old property map and the deed with precise GPS coordinates. As the sun rose, I called a surveyor and paid extra for an urgent assessment. 3 days later, the results confirmed my fear. The boundary markers had been tampered with, pushed about 200 feet into my land. Karen's so-called dream home was squarely planted on my property. As I stared at the report, my phone rang. Maple Ridge HOA lit up the screen. "Hello," I said. "This is Richard Hammond, president of the Maple Ridge Heights HOA. His voice dripped with forced politeness. "I understand there's been some confusion about Mrs. Thompson's home." "There's no confusion. I have evidence it's mine. Let's meet to resolve this misunderstanding." "Fine. Tomorrow, noon, at my cabin." As I hung up, a message appeared from an unknown number. "Back off, or things will get messy. KT." I glanced at the construction site where floodlights now lit the night and crews worked around the clock. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a siege. At noon sharp, 3 luxury SUVs rolled up my drive. Richard stepped out, silver hair gleaming, Maple Ridge polo on full display. Karen followed, heels sinking in the dirt. A young attorney in a sharp suit carried a briefcase. "Mr. Hammond," I said without shaking his hand. "Come in." My grandfather's old cabin wasn't fancy, but I'd spent the morning cleaning and laying out the survey maps, deed, and documents. A pitcher of tea sat ignored. "This is Marcus Delgado, our legal counsel," Richard said. Marcus gave a stiff nod. I cut to the chase. "Did you knowingly build on my property?" Richard smiled, flashing pristine teeth. "That's not how we see it. Our recent assessment showed a decades-old survey error. Karen's house falls inside our updated boundary." "Interesting," I said, sliding over the original and my new survey. "Both of these say otherwise." Karen scoffed. "Anyone can pay a surveyor to fudge numbers?" "Including you," I replied. "But I've got the original deed. The GPS coordinates match the new survey exactly." Marcus glanced through the documents and whispered something. Richard's smile slipped. "Maybe there's been a mix-up. We can work something out. Stop construction and tear down the structure." Karen's face went crimson. "Not a chance." "We've put over 300 Ks into this project. On stolen land," I said evenly. "Do you know who we are?" she hissed. "Apparently people who don't respect property lines." Marcus cleared his throat. "Maybe we should step aside for a moment." While they whispered near the window, I noticed another luxury car pull up. Karen's husband paced outside, cigarette in hand. Richard returned with a softened tone. "We're willing to buy the acre where the house sits. Generous offer, well above value." "I'm not selling." "Everyone has a price," Karen muttered. "My grandfather refused every offer for 40 years. I'm not breaking that promise." Richard's tone hardened. Now this could get ugly. Court costs, delays. "So is rebuilding a house in the wrong place," I shot back. We ended the meeting in a tense silence. As they left, Karen's husband, Michael, confronted me, shorter than I imagined, with a permanent sneer. "You're making a mistake." We run this place. That night, construction roared until dawn, lights aimed straight at my cabin, beeping trucks, leaf blowers, deliveries non-stop. I called the cops. The responding officer looked uneasy. Maple Ridge has special permits. Not much I can do. Later, I went to the county office. Doris, the clerk, remembered my grandfather. That HOA's always pushing boundaries, she said. I dug through dusty records. The revised survey came from a firm with zero digital footprint. I asked Doris about it, and her brow furrowed. That's odd. All valid surveys are filed here. Can you check who requested the boundary change? She typed, then frowned. According to this, your grandfather did. Last year. That's impossible. He died 4 years ago. Someone forged it. Driving back, I passed the construction zone. More workers, faster pace. I needed leverage. At the cabin, one tire was slashed. A note under the wiper read, "Woods are dangerous. Stay safe." That night, cement trucks poured Karen's pool at 2 a.m. I finally dozed off only to wake to a call. "It's Doug. You better get here. They're cutting the oak grove." I ran through the forest. 3 ancient trees already down, sap bleeding from the stumps. Doug pointed at a tree crew, said they had HOA permits to clear hazardous trees. "This isn't HOA land," I said. The foreman shrugged. "Just following orders." I called my lawyer. He'd file an emergency injunction, but it could take days. Too late for the trees. Karen pulled up in her convertible, stepping out with a smirk. "Tragic about those trees," she said cheerfully. "Safety issue. But hey, we'll plant some saplings eventually." "You know this is wrong." She narrowed her eyes. "You're standing in the way of progress. This forest was never going to stay wild. Maple Ridge is expanding. Not on my land. We'll see." She glanced at her diamond watch. "There's a zoning board meeting today, thought you'd want to know." As she drove off, I realized I wasn't just fighting Karen or Richard. I was up against a whole machine. I called Doug. "Tell me everything. Who they know, who they pay. Everything." "You're facing a losing battle," he warned. "They've got influence over half the town." I stared at the latest oak crashing down. "Then I'll find something they need even more than this land. Something they can't do without." My hand shook as I unfolded a yellow document I'd found tucked deep inside my grandfather's old lockbox. The clerk at the records office had mentioned something unusual in our family files, but I never expected this. Turns out my grandfather hadn't just owned the land. He'd sold off very specific power access rights to Maple Ridge Heights a long time ago. "This has to be a mistake," I muttered, racing back to the records department. Mrs. Patel, who'd worked there for nearly 3 decades, peered at the paper through her bifocals. "Your grandfather was sharp," she said. "He sold easement rights to the utility company, but included a clause. They couldn't be transferred unless his heirs were offered them first." I swallowed hard. "And now?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Sunbelt Power restructured back in 2005. Those kinds of local easements no longer fit their model. They've been unclaimed ever since." I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I ran numbers, weighed my risks. My retirement savings, emergency stash, every cent would be needed. Was it worth it? At 6 a.m., as Karen's crew started leveling yet another row of century-old trees, I got my answer. I headed straight to the utility office. The rep looked stunned. "No one's asked about these rights in years." 6 hours later, and with every penny I owned spent, I held the legal title to the Maple Ridge Heights electrical easement. That same evening, a cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a party invite, Karen's housewarming bash, along with a handwritten message. "Come see real progress. You might learn something. My lawyer advised against it. Don't make a move yet. Not until we're ready." But I had to see how far they'd pushed onto my land. Saturday evening came with picture-perfect skies. Karen's mansion lit up the horizon like a lighthouse. Cars lined the narrow street, Richard Hammond's Bentley and Marcus Delgado's Tesla among them. I threw on my best suit and brought a fancy bottle of champagne. No one recognized me at first. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Big, loud, over the top. Countertops thicker than encyclopedias. Chandelier crystals brighter than headlights. Floor-to-ceiling windows gazing out toward the woods. My woods. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Karen's voice sliced through the chatter. The stubborn neighbor joins the party. Eyes turned my way. Guests sipping cocktails, intrigued by the tension. Beautiful home, I said honestly, especially the back patio, 30 feet over my property line. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Karen's smile grew brittle. Let me show you the view everyone's raving about. She led me to a sprawling back deck through towering glass doors. There were fire pits, an outdoor kitchen, and a pristine pool, all stretching to the tree line. The original survey was outdated, she declared to the nearby guests. The HOA fixed the issue. Progress means compromise. I just nodded. The silence irritated her more than anything I could have said. Richard soon approached, offering me a drink. Glad you came. Maybe we can finally move forward. I gave him a polite nod. I've made an interesting purchase. Oh? He barely listened, already scanning the crowd. I now own the electrical easement rights to Maple Ridge Heights. His glass froze halfway to his mouth. That's absurd. You're welcome to check with the county, I said steady. And while you're at it, look at the updated property lines. You missed a few things. A small group had gathered, sensing trouble. Karen's voice rose. You can't just buy power rights. That's not how this works. It's exactly how it works, I replied. Your lawyers didn't catch the clause. First right of refusal, directly to heirs. Richard yanked Karen aside, whispering fast. She looked furious. A moment later, her husband Michael joined them, face tight, hand gripping her elbow. Whatever you think you're doing, it won't work, Karen hissed. We control the HOA, every vote, every move. Did you tell your neighbors their new clubhouse is on stolen land? I said quietly. Michael stepped forward. You may need to leave. Agreed. I set my untouched champagne on a nearby table. I've got a meeting at the power company in the morning. Apparently there's critical maintenance overdue in this area. As I turned for the door, Karen laughed stiffly. Some people just don't understand growth. But I noticed Eleanor Winters watching from the crowd, the oldest homeowner in Maple Ridge. She gave me a subtle nod as our eyes met. Outside, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I glanced back at the glowing house, so much light, so much depending on electricity. My phone buzzed, a text from my attorney. Everything's finalized, we're ready. I looked back one last time at the mansion built on stolen soil. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. At 9 a.m. sharp on Monday, 7 courier trucks rolled up to the HOA office. Each driver carried sealed envelopes for specific recipients. Karen, Michael, Richard Delgado, every board member, and one for the HOA files. From across the street, I watched the receptionist raise her brows as she read the opening page. My phone rang. My lawyer. It's done, she said. Are you sure about the timeline? 30 days is tight. They built that house in 4 months, I replied. They can tear it down in 1. The letter was direct. They had 30 days to remove every structure from my land and return it to its original condition. Otherwise, I'd invoke my easement rights to conduct prolonged electrical maintenance, which, unfortunately, would involve disabling power to key sections of Maple Ridge Heights. My phone exploded with calls for the next hour. Unfamiliar numbers, angry texts, even an email from Marcus labeled Urgent Settlement Proposal. I ignored them all. At 2:17 p.m., Richard Hammond showed up at my door, his Bentley skewed on the gravel. "This isn't necessary," he said, holding the letter like it was toxic. "Let's resolve this reasonably." "I tried that 3 months ago," I said, unmoving. "I showed you the boundaries. You kept building." "The HOA has called an emergency meeting tonight. You should come." "I'll bring my lawyer." The community center buzzed with more people than I'd ever seen. Word had spread. Dozens of residents packed the chairs, faces tense. Karen and Michael sat front and center, whispering furiously with Marcus. Richard tried to sound composed as he opened the meeting. "We're facing a complex issue, property lines, utility access." Karen leapt to her feet. "He's threatening to cut our power. This is blackmail." My lawyer, Dana Mitchell, stood calmly beside me. "No, it's called property law. My client owns the land and the electrical rights. We're giving 30 days. That's generous." The room filled with murmurs. Most residents were learning about this for the first time. An older man raised his hand. "So what happens to our power?" Dana laid it out, crystal clear. I scanned the room as she spoke. Richard's face twisted with calculation. Karen looked ready to explode. The rest? They looked scared, and that's when I knew the tide had turned. Marcus Delgado tried to get things back on track. "This is just about one property line," he said. "It shouldn't affect the rest of the neighborhood." "But it does," I replied, rising to my feet for the first time. "Because your HOA president and VP shifted boundary markers on my land while I was overseas. Then they sold off a portion that didn't belong to them. And now they're hoping you'll all pressure me into letting them keep it." The room broke into a low roar. Eleanor Winters, whom I'd seen at Karen's party, walked up to the microphone. "I've lived here 20 years, she said. "Are you saying the HOA changed property lines on purpose?" Richard quickly ushered Marcus and Karen into a quiet corner. Their hushed argument still carried across the room. Karen flushed deep red as Marcus seemed to deliver bad news. After their impromptu huddle, Richard returned to me, smile tight. "Maybe we can settle this privately." The meeting ended with vague promises to follow up. Outside, Richard cornered me in the parking lot. "Let's be reasonable," he said. His tone was friendly, but his eyes were hard. "What do you really want?" "My land returned to how it was," I said without hesitation. "That would bankrupt Karen," he snapped. "That house cost over $700,000. Then she shouldn't have built on land that wasn't hers." Over the following days, their approach shifted. First, they offered me a different plot. Then cash. Then even a spot in their private community. When none of that worked, the threats began. Marcus sent letters warning of drawn-out lawsuits. Michael spoke with my boss, suggesting my personal drama could affect my job. By day 14, strangers started showing up at my cabin. Some asked me to consider the community's peace and home values. Others didn't bother being polite. One man in a sports car who claimed to be Karen's cousin warned me. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said. "People who go up against the Thompsons usually regret it." The next morning, I installed security cameras. On day 17, Eleanor Winters dropped by with a pie and a story. "I've been here longer than Karen and Richard," she said, settling into a porch chair. "This isn't the first time they've pulled something shady. The Jacobsons lost half their yard a few years ago. Suddenly it was common space. The Millers had to tear down their gazebo last year. New rules added after they built it." "Why doesn't anyone stop them?" I asked. "Fear," she said, "and the fact that Richard's brother-in-law is a county judge, but no one's ever pushed back the way you are." On day 22, my surveyor called. His voice was uneasy. "Someone from Maple Ridge Heights reached out," he said. "Offered me triple my fee to revise the property lines in their favor." "Did they give a name?" I asked. "No, but it was a man. Hinted at future opportunities if I helped resolve things." I thanked him and added the call to my growing file. On day 28, a certified letter arrived, Marcus offering me my full asking price for the acre, 10 times its market value. "This is their final offer," Dana told me. "They still think you're bluffing about cutting the power." That evening, a news van parked outside. A reporter stepped out with a mic. "We're covering property disputes in fast-growing areas," she said. "Richard Hammond said you had a misunderstanding." I smiled. "I'd be happy to show you the original boundary markers, the updated survey, and documents proving what happened while I was away." Her eyes widened. "That's not how Mr. Hammond described it." "Of course it's not." On day 29, Richard knocked on my door again. No Bentley this time, and no smug smile. "You've made your point," he said, worn down. "What will it take to end this?" "Exactly what the notice said," I replied. "Clear the structures from my property. Be reasonable. We can't tear down a house in a day." "You've had 29 days to get started," I said, "and I haven't seen a single moving truck." He ran a hand through his hair. He suddenly looked older. "We've spoken to the utility company. They say you can't cut power without permits and official work orders." "This isn't a bluff," I said, handing him a folder. Inside were copies of permits, work orders, and signed authorizations from the county. 9 tomorrow morning," I said, "unless I see bulldozers at dawn." His hands trembled slightly as he took the folder. "You'd really do this? Risk hurting innocent families?" "Only 5 homes are on that section of the grid," I replied. "Yours, Karen's, and 3 others. I made sure of that. The rest of the neighborhood won't be affected." As he walked off, I saw a small group gathered at the edge of my property. Karen wasn't among them, but Eleanor Winters was, along with a few familiar faces from the HOA meeting. My phone buzzed. A text from Dana. "Emergency board meeting tonight. Word is they're split." I watched the sun go down behind the trees still standing on my land. Tomorrow they'd have to decide. Bring in the bulldozers, or live in the dark. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed again. "Are you sure about this?" Julio from the utility company asked. "They had 30 days, I said, staring at the calendar with 29 X's. "They made their choice." "All right," he said. "Crews rolling out now." I stepped onto my porch and looked toward Maple Ridge Heights. For a moment, silence. Then, one by one, lights flickered and went dark in the northeast section. Karen's custom home, built on my stolen land, went black. So did Richard's colonial and 3 others. My phone lit up with messages, first from Richard, "This is unacceptable." Then more, "Cease this immediately or face legal action." I didn't respond. By 10:30, 3 news vans were parked outside the neighborhood entrance. Reporter Tanya Winters tried approaching Karen's home, but got turned away by security. She showed up at my cabin instead. "Are you the property owner in dispute with the Maple Ridge HOA?" she asked, mic ready. "I am," I said evenly. "Want to see the original survey? And the documentation proving they built on land that wasn't theirs?" As the camera rolled, I showed her the deed, the updated boundary report, and my easement rights. "They had 30 days to make it right," I said. They ignored me. "And now you've cut their power?" she asked. "Not exactly. As the easement rights holder, I authorized essential maintenance that requires temporary service suspension. How long it lasts depends on when the HOA takes responsibility." By noon, Richard's wife was banging on my door, makeup smeared, hair frizzed from stress and heat. "This is cruel," she shouted. "We had food prepped for the charity gala. It's all spoiling." "I get that," I replied calmly. "There are hotels nearby with generators, or maybe unaffected neighbors could help store your perishables." "You don't know who you're messing with," she hissed. "Richard's got ties to the mayor, to local judges," I said, steady. "But I've got the law, documented easement rights, and clearly defined property lines on my side." She sped off, her tires throwing gravel as she left my driveway. By 2 p.m., Karen showed up herself, flanked by 2 unfamiliar men. One wore a pricey suit despite the heat. The other had the stance of private security. "You need to turn our power back on immediately," Karen demanded. "Todd, here's on city council. He could make your life very uncomfortable." The suited man gave a tight nod. "This can still be resolved without all this." "I completely agree," I said. "That's why I gave you 30 days to begin removing the structure from my land. You ignored that deadline." "We can't just tear down a house," Karen shouted. "And yet you managed to build one on land that wasn't yours," I replied. "Interesting how that works." The man with the bodyguard look stepped forward. "Maybe we should speak in private." "There's nothing to say that can't be said in front of the cameras parked at the end of the driveway," I replied, nodding toward the now 3 news vans. They left without another word. That evening my lawyer called. They filed for an emergency injunction to get the power turned back on. And Judge Whitaker denied it after reviewing our evidence. They're starting to panic. As dusk settled in, I rocked on my porch swing, fireflies rising from the grass. In the distance, Karen's darkened mansion sat silhouetted against the fading sun. No more blaring music, no landscapers, no pool parties, just frogs and crickets. Peaceful, finally. Meanwhile, social media was catching fire. Residents in other parts of Maple Ridge started posting furious comments about the HOA board. Stories surfaced. Renovations unfairly rejected, selective rule enforcement, shady exceptions granted only to insiders. After midnight, I spotted 3 cars arriving at Karen's house under the glow of generator-powered lights. Through my binoculars, I saw Richard, Karen, and a few board members arguing on the driveway. By dawn, an email pinged my inbox. Emergency HOA board meeting. 7 a.m. resolution discussion. Your presence requested. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who showed up at 6:30 sharp with a coffee in hand and that look she gets when she smells victory. "Time to negotiate," she said. "Yes," I replied, "but I'm not backing off the core issue." At 7 a.m., we pulled into a packed Maple Ridge Community Center parking lot. The board was there, and so were dozens of residents who'd somehow caught wind of the meeting. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Richard sat at the head table, visibly worn out. Karen was nowhere in sight. Then, from the crowd, a sharp voice rang out. "I'm Eleanor Winters," a silver-haired woman announced as I entered. "I've lived here for 20 years and had no idea what they did to your land. None of us did." The room murmured in agreement. Richard cleared his throat. He glanced at the board before turning to me with tired eyes. "We're prepared to talk terms," he said. But were they truly ready to concede, or just stalling again? And where was Karen? Then, Marcus Delgado, the HOA's lawyer, stood. "We expect the power restored immediately, as a show of good faith," he declared, voice ringing through the room. I looked to my lawyer. She shook her head slightly. "No deal until there's a signed agreement," I said. "I've learned not to trust this board's promises." A murmur swept through the room. Many residents were fanning themselves in the heat, some with battery-operated fans. Eleanor rose again. "Where is Karen? She should be part of this." Richard shifted uncomfortably. "She's, attending to personal matters." "Packing her bags, you mean?" someone shouted from the back. "My cousin's her moving guy. They were at her place this morning. The room broke into a loud stir. My lawyer raised a hand. Here are our conditions, she said, sliding papers across the table. 1. The house built on our client's land must be dismantled within 60 days. 2. The HOA covers all removal costs. 3. The property boundaries to be restored and permanently marked. 4. Compensation for the destroyed trees and sustained harassment. Richard looked over the papers, his expression draining of color. This would wipe out the HOA's reserve fund. A woman near Eleanor snapped, "Then maybe you shouldn't have stolen the land in the first place." To my surprise, Richard's wife leaned forward and spoke quietly. "We should accept this. It's gone too far." Marcus huddled with the board. Richard kept shaking his head. Then Eleanor stepped forward. "I'd like to offer an alternative," she said, as the room quieted. "One that helps everyone. The HOA buys the house from Karen at cost. We carefully dismantle it and reuse the materials to expand the community center, something we've been planning for years. We fund it partly through reserves and partly through a special assessment on the board members who approved the illegal build." Richard tried to interrupt, but Eleanor pressed on. "Karen recovers most of her money. The landowner gets his property back. We gain building materials, and those responsible are held accountable, without bankrupting the entire community." My lawyer leaned in. "Honestly, not a bad proposal." I nodded slowly. 3 conditions. 1. The agreement must be signed today, and dismantling starts immediately. 2. The boundary gets marked with permanent fixtures that cannot be tampered with. 3. I want a public apology. Negotiations stretched on for hours. Outside, news vans were still waiting. My phone buzzed with a message from Julio at the power company. "Pressure from city officials is building." "How much longer?" "Almost there," I texted back. "Hold the line." Finally, at 2 p.m., the agreement was signed. I called Julio. Minutes later, power flicked back on, greeted by cheers from the crowd. Every condition I requested was included, plus one surprise: Richard's immediate resignation as HOA president. Eleanor was named interim leader until official elections. From my cabin, I watched work crews begin dismantling Karen's home piece by piece. No wrecking balls. Everything labeled, catalogued, and repurposed. Windows for the community center, cabinets for the pool area, floors for clubhouse repairs. A week into the process, a black car pulled into my drive. Karen stepped out alone, no entourage. She looked smaller now. "May I come in?" she asked. I hesitated. "I'm not here to argue," she added. We sat on the porch, untouched lemonade glasses between us. "They're making Michael and me repay the HOA for the difference," she said. "We'll have to sell our other homes." I said nothing. "You could have just taken the money," she said quietly. "Why insist on removing the house?" I paused before answering. "That land was my grandfather's. He believed the earth isn't ours, we just borrow it. When you cut down those 100-year-old trees, you didn't just steal from me, you stole from future generations." She stared at her lemonade. "They told me the land always belonged to Maple Ridge. I never checked." "That's still a choice," I said. Karen left soon after. I heard they moved to Arizona. 3 months later, every trace of the house was gone. The HOA brought in specialists to replant native trees where the foundation once sat. Eleanor invited me to the planting ceremony. "We're putting a conservation easement on this border," she said, as we watched volunteers digging holes. "It'll never be built on again, no matter who owns it." I sold the electrical easement back to the HOA at cost, with a clause ensuring part of future HOA fees support local conservation. Richard showed up briefly, humbled. He found me by the new boundary posts, granite markers sunk 5 feet into the ground. "I misjudged you," he said. "Thought you were just someone we could pressure into giving up." "Most bullies do," I replied. The media eventually moved on. But my story became a case study in state university property law classes. Twice a year, students came to see the site and learn about easement rights. 5 years later, I built a wooden viewing deck in the trees where Karen's house once stood. Now, oak and maple saplings reached 10 feet tall. In spring, wildflowers covered the forest floor. Sometimes I brought my nephew up there and told him the story, not about revenge, but about protecting what matters. The best part, I'd say, as birds flitted between the trees, isn't that I got the land back. It's that something better replaced what was lost. My grandfather would have understood. The land always remembers, both the damage and the healing.